The moment the black SUV door opened, Meghan Markle believed the cameras would follow her. They always had, but this time they didn't. Instead, something colder was waiting, something rehearsed, something final. Because before Meghan could even take 3 confident steps toward the glowing entrance of New York Fashion Week, a security guard moved directly into her path. Not nervously, not confused, but with chilling certainty. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't asking. He already knew. And then came the sentence that insiders say froze her where she stood. "We're sorry, but you are no longer welcome. Not tonight, not here, not anymore." In that instant, the illusion shattered. This wasn't a scheduling mistake. This wasn't a mix-up. This wasn't some innocent misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with a smile and a phone call. This was deliberate, calculated, authorized. Because according to whispers that spread through Manhattan's elite circles like wildfire, the order didn't come from security, it came from the top. Event organizers, sponsors, PR teams, the very architects of image and power. They had discussed her, evaluated her, weighed the risk, and they chose rejection. Not quietly, not gently, but unmistakably. Witnesses say Meghan's expression changed immediately. The confidence drained from her face, replaced by something raw, something unguarded, shock mixed with disbelief. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. This wasn't how her entrances worked. She had arrived expecting admiration. Instead, she was handed exclusion. Because in the brutal ecosystem of fashion, perception is everything. And insiders were already whispering the unthinkable truth. Meghan Markle had become a liability, not an asset, not an icon, a liability. For years, she had mastered the art of controlling the narrative. Every appearance, every speech, every carefully curated interview was designed to reinforce one message, that she was untouchable, unstoppable, inevitable. But now, the very industries that once elevated her were pulling away, quietly, coldly, completely. And the rejection in New York wasn't happening in isolation. It was a visible symptom of something much larger, something darker, something collapsing behind the scenes. Because while Meghan stood outside that glowing entrance, another reality was unfolding in whispers across continents. Rumors of financial scrutiny were intensifying. Former staff members were beginning to talk. Partnerships that once seemed guaranteed were quietly evaporating. Doors weren't just closing, they were locking. And nowhere was that shift more visible than in the world that once adored her most, media and fashion. There was a time when Meghan Markle could do no wrong. When she and Harry sat down with Oprah, the world leaned forward. Every word they spoke landed like thunder. Sympathy poured in. Support surged. She wasn't just telling a story, she was shaping history. She was the woman who walked away from royalty and survived. The woman who defied an institution. The woman who reclaimed her voice. Brands rushed to associate with her. Executives lined up to collaborate. Streaming giants saw her as a global force capable of redefining influence itself. She wasn't chasing relevance. She was relevance. But power, especially borrowed power, is fragile. And slowly, almost invisibly at first, the cracks began to show. It started with whispers, quiet complaints, stories that didn't align with the carefully constructed image. Former insiders began to describe a different Meghan, not the calm, compassionate advocate seen on television, but someone far more demanding, far more volatile, someone whose presence created tension, not inspiration. At first, the public dismissed it. After all, powerful women are often criticized unfairly, but the stories didn't stop. They multiplied. And with every new contradiction, every inconsistency, every uncomfortable revelation, something shifted in the collective perception. The untouchable image became vulnerable. The admiration became skepticism. And skepticism, once born, is impossible to contain. Projects that were supposed to solidify her dominance instead raised questions. Interviews meant to clarify only deepened the confusion. Moments designed to inspire began to feel rehearsed, manufactured, calculated, and the public noticed. Because authenticity cannot be faked forever. And once people start questioning what's real and what isn't, the illusion begins to dissolve. Which brings us back to that night in New York. Because what happened outside those doors wasn't just about one event. It was a message, a signal, a declaration that the balance of power had shifted. That Meghan Markle was no longer being welcomed automatically, she was being evaluated, judged, excluded. Insiders said the decision wasn't emotional, it was strategic. Brands weren't acting out of spite, they were acting out of fear. Fear of controversy, fear of unpredictability, fear of becoming entangled in narratives they could no longer control. Because controversy attracts attention, but it also attracts risk. And in an industry obsessed with perfection, risk is unacceptable. Even Prince Harry, according to sources, has begun to feel the weight of this transformation. The man who once stood fiercely beside his wife now reportedly spends more time in silence, reflecting, recalculating, retreating inward, because the world they built together was supposed to offer freedom. Instead, it delivered exposure, unfiltered, unforgiving, and perhaps irreversible. Friends whisper that Harry has begun to recognize something he never anticipated, that life outside the palace doesn't come with guaranteed loyalty. That influence must be maintained, not assumed. That admiration must be earned repeatedly, not inherited. And the realization has been devastating, because for Meghan, reinvention was always the plan. But reinvention requires acceptance, and acceptance suddenly is no longer guaranteed. The most chilling part isn't the rejection itself, it's the silence that follows, because once the camera stops chasing you, once the invitations stop arriving, once the rooms stop opening, you are left alone with a question no public figure ever wants to face. What happens when the world stops watching? And that question is now surrounding Meghan Markle like a shadow she cannot outrun. Because the rejection in New York wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Its power was in its simplicity. You are no longer welcome. Not shouted, not debated, just stated. Final. And for someone who once commanded every room she entered, being stopped at the door wasn't just humiliation. It was transformation, the kind that changes everything. And that was the moment something inside her shifted, because rejection wasn't part of Meghan Markle's reality. Not like this, not publicly, not in front of strangers who didn't bow, didn't apologize, didn't scramble to fix the situation. This wasn't a door that could be reopened with influence. This was a door that had already been sealed. And insiders say what happened in the minutes after that rejection revealed far more than anyone expected. Witnesses describe a tension that thickened the air itself. Meghan didn't immediately leave. She stood there, frozen between two worlds, the one she believed she still belonged to and the one that had already moved on without her. Because for years, she had operated with certainty. Certainty that her name alone carried weight. Certainty that her presence was valuable. Certainty that the narrative could always be reshaped. But narrative control has limits, and now she was standing face to face with one of them. Behind those glowing doors were the same types of people who once celebrated her arrival. Designers who once dressed her, executives who once praised her, photographers who once waited hours just to capture a single frame of her entrance. Now they weren't waiting, they weren't watching, they weren't even acknowledging her existence. And that silence was louder than any headline, because silence doesn't argue. Silence concludes. What makes this moment even more devastating, according to those watching closely, is how quickly everything changed. Meghan's rise had been meteoric, almost unreal. One moment she was stepping into royal life, the next she was stepping out of it, rewriting the rules in real time. She wasn't just surviving outside the institution, she was supposed to dominate beyond it. That was the promise. That was the plan. That was the future she believed was guaranteed. But power built on momentum can collapse the same way it rises, suddenly, completely, without warning. And now, the consequences were becoming impossible to ignore, because the rejection at Fashion Week wasn't the beginning of her fall. It was the confirmation of it. Insiders say that behind the scenes, major players had already begun distancing themselves. Invitations that once arrived automatically stopped coming. Calls that were once answered immediately began going unanswered. Opportunities that once felt inevitable suddenly became uncertain. Not publicly, not dramatically, but methodically, because industries like fashion and media don't announce rejection. They demonstrate it quietly. And for Meghan, the pattern was becoming unmistakable. Even more troubling were whispers that Prince Harry himself was beginning to feel the psychological toll of this transformation. The man who once spoke with fierce conviction, who once challenged entire institutions, was reportedly becoming quieter, more withdrawn, more cautious, because he, more than anyone, understood what had been sacrificed. He had walked away from everything familiar, his role, his structure, his identity. He did it believing they would build something stronger, something untouchable, something permanent. But permanence is fragile when it depends on public perception, and perception had changed. Friends close to him say he has begun reflecting on the life he left behind, not publicly, not dramatically, but privately, carefully. The memories of purpose, the clarity of role, the certainty of belonging, things that can't be easily replaced. And now, as Meghan faced rejection in spaces that once welcomed her effortlessly, Harry was forced to confront a question he may never have fully considered. What if the world outside the palace was never theirs to control? Because outside those royal walls, there are no guarantees, no protection, no automatic reverence, only relevance. And relevance must be maintained relentlessly. But maintaining relevance requires something the couple was rapidly losing: universal support. Because public opinion doesn't collapse all at once. It erodes, one contradiction at a time, one controversy at a time, one rejection at a time, until suddenly the foundation is gone. And the most dangerous part of this moment isn't the criticism, it's the indifference. Because criticism still means people care. Indifference means they don't. And insiders say that's exactly what Meghan is facing now. Not active hostility, but passive disengagement. The kind that slowly erases influence without confrontation. The kind that cannot be fought. The kind that cannot be reversed with a single interview or a single appearance. Because once industries decide to move on, they rarely turn back. And perhaps the most devastating realization of all is this: Meghan didn't lose her platform overnight. She lost it gradually, piece by piece, opportunity by opportunity, until one night in New York it became undeniable. She was no longer being welcomed automatically. She was being stopped, evaluated, turned away, not because of a single moment, but because of 1,000 invisible decisions made quietly behind closed doors. Decisions made by people who once supported her, people who once believed in her, people who once helped build the very platform she stood on. And now those same people were stepping back, not announcing it, not explaining it, just moving on, leaving her outside. And that is the part no one prepared her for. Because fame doesn't disappear dramatically. It fades. Until one day you realize the cameras aren't following you anymore. The invitations aren't arriving anymore. The world isn't watching anymore. And when Meghan Markle stood outside those Fashion Week doors, hearing words she never expected to hear, she wasn't just being rejected from an event. She was confronting something far more terrifying. The possibility that the narrative she spent years building was no longer hers to control. And the most unsettling truth of all isn't what happened that night. It's what happens next. Because reinvention only works when the world is willing to believe in it. And right now, the world is watching, waiting, deciding whether Meghan Markle still belongs in the story at all.